Hi everyone, this is NUSensei. Many of you have just joined the channel, have been observing a lot of heated discussion about the topic of Olympic archery, and specifically about how much easier Olympic archery is. It's clear that there are two different perspectives that can't be reconciled. One which says that modern archery makes it too easy to use, and the other side which defends modern freestyle archery, saying that the equipment doesn't make it easier. And a lot of people are becoming very semantic or pedantic about archery and the definition of what easier means. Now, I have an opinion, of course, but I've been trying to avoid arguing with every single person because that doesn't really do anything other than add fuel to the fire. And my approach, preferably, is to try to explain the perspective. So that way, even if you have your opinion, then you're allowed to keep that. Whereas if you have the understanding of how different things work, then perhaps you might come out with the same opinion, but more enlightened about it. The purpose of this discussion is to clarify what people mean by easier, and also think about whether we are thinking way too much about whether being easier is a bad thing. Firstly, the division between the definitions of easy. This is often divided along the line of people who do archery and people who don't. And this is actually, I think, the biggest source of misconceptions or misunderstanding. I can understand and in some ways empathize with people who do traditional archery and they don't like modern archery, because I understand why you choose to do your particular form. But it's harder to cross this barrier of understanding when you haven't done archery before and all you're using is your judgment based on what you've seen or the way you think things work. But more to the point, the difference in the way we see the word easy is exactly which part of archery becomes easier. The way in which most people who are non-archers or are not familiar with archery see the whole idea of modern equipment is that it's easier to get a higher score because archery is an accuracy sport. Therefore, anything which allows you to get a higher score makes it easier. Where this gets convoluted is that it also becomes mixed in with the misconception that it makes the bow easier to use. And therefore, you go along the slippery slope argument of having a bow that shoots itself. That we can debunk right away. I know some people say this out of sarcasm, but some people might actually think that these modern bows with all the fancy gadgets are a step away from an automatically firing bow. That's not what it is. It's very clear and obvious. The bow does not shoot itself. There is nothing on a modern bow which provides a mechanical aid or assistance that removes the shot from the archer. The archer still must make the shot. They must control everything from the draw to the anchor to the expansion and release. So all the steps that a traditional shooter would take are the same steps that a modern target Olympic recurve shooter would take. The other notion that I want to debunk is the idea that something that is easier must take less skill. I will again challenge this notion that Olympic archery is easier because it takes less skill. If that is true, that means more people would do Olympic freestyle archery and more people would be exceptionally good at it. And that means for you out there who haven't shot a bow before, you should be able to pick up a modern bow with sights and stabilizers and a clicker and shoot exceptionally well. Clearly, you do not. And clearly, the majority of the population do not. And even more so, the majority of archers who participate and compete in freestyle archery don't do that well. What we see is still a distinction in skill. Regardless of the equipment used, there is a difference in skill levels. even the archers at the very top end, the champions you see on TV and YouTube videos, they are the very best in the world. Of course you will see them perform exceptionally well, hitting the bullseye most of the time. Not all of the time, but most of the time. But that's the stand of competition today. These people didn't get there because the bow makes it easier. They still worked as hard as every other athlete to achieve their own top results. For those who say that Olympic recurve lowers skill level, that's clearly not the case as seen the results at any level, club, state, national, or so on. The skill gap is still clearly seen between the bottom archers and the top archers, and they may be hundreds of points apart. Just because you use a modern bow with sights and stabilizers doesn't mean you automatically shoot well. And a good barebow shooter will outshoot an average modern recurve shooter. You see this at tournaments all the time because skill is independent of equipment. And for those of you who still think that modern Olympic archery is too easy and that it removes all skill, you do it. Prove it. I'm not talking about buying a bow and sticking a sight on it, shooting your 5-meter backyard. I mean, take your bow out, shoot 70 meters, and see how easy it is. One thing that is very easy is being an armchair expert. But let's actually turn this into a serious discussion about why people have this adversity towards modern progression or new equipment, because this isn't new. In practically every sport, there is this divide between the traditionalists and the progressive participants or athletes. And like I said, in every sport you see an advancement in technology and equipment. Everything from running to swimming to shooting and sailing and motorsports. There is almost no sport that is untouched by time. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. And if you think about where we've come from, then we are limited in a lot of our performance factors, our athletic ability, because of technical and technological limitations. The advent of certain technologies or equipment or even rules make achievements possible. They don't just make it easier, they make it possible. Certain things could not be done with old technology. For example, look at high jump. How can high jump be easier? Well, the original high jump didn't have a giant fluffy mat to fall into. You had to land on what is basically a spread of cork or straw. And if you didn't land on your feet, you'd probably break your leg. So the most common technique was the standing scissor jump or similar. Now, when they introduced the mattress, then people could suddenly jump and flop over the bar instead of landing on their feet. And that meant that high jumpers could now jump much higher than they could before. Does this mean that high jump is easier and takes less skill? Modern sprinters today have the benefit of not only modern shoes and starting blocks, but even the surface of the track has been upgraded with modern materials to enable runners to run faster. Does this make running easier? Does this reduce the skill level of a sprinter? A track racing bicycle today is no easier to ride than a bicycle from 100 years ago. It might be new designs and new materials, but the challenge and the physical demands are still there. And you need to remember the point of a freestyle division. It's meant to allow competitors to compete using rules which are different to the original form. Look at wrestling. You have the original Greco-Roman wrestling, and then you have the modern freestyle wrestling, which allows a greater variety of techniques. Does that mean that a Greco-Roman wrestler will look at a freestyle wrestler and go, oh, that's too easy? Is a swimmer who specializes in breaststroke going to look at someone using the front crawl in freestyle and go, you know, it's too easy to swim quickly, that takes less skill? The Olympic ethos is faster, higher, stronger. As long as the technology does not replace the athlete, then the athlete should be encouraged to do things which allow them to be faster, to be more precise, to last longer. I think many of us have a romanticized view of the old ways being the best. They're not. If they were the best, they'd still be used today. It's okay to do something out of nostalgia. It's why people still enjoy black powder muskets. But to imagine that a black powder musket would be as accurate as a modern rifle, you're kidding yourself. And you shouldn't let that stop progress. The fact is, a medieval bow is not even remotely competitive against even a modern bear bow. The equipment is the bottleneck. And for many people who have continually put forward the argument that, the Olympic Games should not be about who has the best equipment, it's not. Most people use the same sort of equipment. And that is a fair competition. If you don't like modern archery because it's a competitive sport and that's not your thing, that's fair. If you like shooting traditional bear bows and just enjoying the outdoors, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you think that modern archery is easy, get off your couch and give it a shot. And just to close this observation, you might think that traditional archers may be the most vocal critics of modern archery. After all, modern archery has taken the sport away from its roots. Well, most traditional shooters have no issue with modern archery. It's the armchair experts who think that modern archery has gone way too far from its roots. It's the people who have never used a bow who are the most vocal. The ones who have not used a bow who think it's easy. Traditional shooters know what they can and can't do. It's kind of funny how the most criticism doesn't come from the archery community itself, including traditional shooters. It comes from people whose only experience of archery is playing rogue in World of Warcraft. There's really no point in arguing about how easy it is in the comments, because if you've never experienced it, then you have no first-hand knowledge of how hard or how easy archery is. So instead of smacking your keys and going on a tirade, actions speak louder than words. Go out there and prove it. Who knows, you might actually enjoy it. To conclude, I don't think any archer, regardless of what style they shoot or what bow they use, will say that archery is too easy. The only people who say so are those who don't shoot.